Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we're going to round up all of the press conference updates, go through some of those key injury updates as well, and at the end of the video I'll be answering some of your key questions around Gameweek 13 too. If you're enjoying the content here on this channel and you get any use from today's video, please do smash that like. Let's aim for 2,000 likes on today's video. Make sure to subscribe as well, but without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, the first thing we're going to do in this video is fly through all of the injury updates and key press conference updates. And then at the end of the video, I do have a few questions that you've asked me around some of the best defenders, captaincy, etc. But first, let's deal with the updates that we got in today's press conference. The first one around Jarrod Bowen, and unfortunately, the one that we probably needed the most and was probably the least useful. The quote from Moyes in the press conference was, "We hope Jarrod will be available tomorrow against Burnley, but we will make a decision on that tomorrow." That is actually a lot more positive than we thought. We had these quotes going around on sort of Wednesday and Thursday that there was fluid in his knee, he was getting a scan and it wasn't looking good. This now suggests that there's a chance he features. And so I guess we can say, if this is true, and Moyes isn't lying, or at least hiding the truth slightly, that he'd probably be available for Game Week 14, assuming that everything goes okay with his recovery, and there's a chance he's available for Game Week 13, and this puts us in probably the most difficult position, because if he's fit, you keep him, and if he's not fit, you sell him. You can see here that when I tweeted about this earlier, I did say, I don't think you can sell him now, because he arguably, out of all of the players in our teams, has the best fixture on paper this week. We know that Jarrod Bowen has scored in every away game this season. Burnley are not doing very well defensively, even at Turf Moor. So this is a fixture where a lot of us, myself included, were looking to captain Bowen. And if there's a chance that he's available, we probably want him long term. We definitely want him this week. And all of the players that we're looking to move to, bar maybe Eze, the likes of Palmer and Mbeumo, they don't have the best fixture this week. So you could end up removing Bowen against Burnley away, who then plays, and bringing in something like Mbeumo against Arsenal. And whilst Mbeumo is an excellent pick regardless of the fixture this week, I still don't think that's a move you want to make unless we get some definitive news that he's not going to feature. Normally with players like Jarrod Bowen, like with Saka, we kind of say they're either going to start or just not feature at all. It's not very often that you see a key player for a team brought with the squad, sat on the bench just in case they're needed. But I have seen a few West Ham fans calling for exactly that they take Jarrod Bowen. If they need Bowen because they can't beat Burnley without him, then of course they can bring him on. And if not, then of course they can keep him on the bench and not risk him. So I guess there is a slight risk that you get a cameo, but my opinion is probably that he'll either play or not feature at all. So then what it comes down to is, are you happy keeping him for 1 week even if he doesn't play? And what is your first sub currently looking like? Because if your first sub is really, really weak, let's say the only one you've got on the bench is like Tsimikas against Man City, and you really want Mbeumo or you want Eze, then maybe you make the move anyway. But for me, to round all of that up, I think this is a case of you don't buy Bowen, you don't sell Bowen, and you don't captain Bowen. Right? I wouldn't sell him out your teams. I wouldn't be bringing him in. And I don't trust this enough to captain him. But if you have him, I do think he's a hold. And I think you probably start him. I don't think you bench him unless you've already somehow, despite the fixtures being difficult, got a really difficult benching headache and you think that he is okay to sit on the bench. So for me, my current plan, keep Bowen, don't captain Bowen, don't vice captain him, but I will be starting him unless we get a definitive update. I would love to know what your plans are down below in the comments. So arguably the biggest surprise of the press conference was around Mitoma. We saw some footage on Thursday that looked like he was going out with the team to train. However, he has now been ruled out for Game Week 13, which is very interesting. We thought he would be fine based on that footage. And based on the quotes, it does look like Mitoma has been training in some regards. You can see here, Milner and Mitoma are not available, but they are working with the squad. Igor is a doubt, but again, I don't think many people own him there. Estepinian is facing a significant absence. Looks like he'll be out for a very long time once again. So he's obviously, whatever injury he had before, he's made that worse once again. So it doesn't look like Estepinian will be back anytime soon. Dunk is available, which is a massive boost for them and should make them a little bit more solid defensively. And then Lamptey could feature in some way. So if you have Lamptey sat on the bench, maybe he'll be back soon. And again, with Estepinian being out long term, if Lamptey can somehow stay fit, which he hasn't been able to in recent years, then he could become an option at some point. But the key thing here, Mitoma is out for Game Week 13. The fact that he has been training and working with the squad in some regard, though, would make me think, without a shadow of a doubt, unless he obviously makes the injury worse next week, between Game Week 13 and 14, he should be back for 14. So I think you have a similar situation with Bowen, in that we don't really know. Well, he's not going to be fit for Game Week 13, but we don't really know if he'll be back for 14, but it is looking quite likely. I think the difference between Mitoma and Bowen is twofold. The first is I just don't think Mitoma is as great of a pick as Bowen. I think Bowen is excellent. Bowen is a player I would want long term. Mitoma and Brighton have struggled in recent weeks, and I think Mitoma was looking like a sell in the near future anyway, so this maybe gives you an excuse to do so. And the other thing is Mitoma is definitely not available for 13, whereas with Bowen there's a chance. So I think for those reasons there, Mitoma is a sell for me, and I think it is not obvious to move to Mbeumo, but if you don't have Mbeumo, and you don't have another route to him in 14, Mitoma to Mbeumo now, I know it's 1 week early, and I know Mbeumo is playing against the best defence in the league in Arsenal, but it just feels like a good transfer to make because it gets you ahead of where you want to be, and it saves you from having to make another transfer next week. But if you already own Mbeumo, or you don't want to bring him in this week, or you're just not convinced overall, I think the other two options I do really like are Palmer, just because he's cheap on penalties at the moment. And I think once Nkunku comes back, I could see it making Palmer an even better option, assuming that he hangs on to penalties. And then the player with the best fixture this week, and also decent over the next couple, is Eze. Eze's data has always been good. He's on penalties. He plays 90 minutes. So I think those would be my top three options. Mbeumo, Palmer, and Eze. Longer term, it is Mbeumo and Palmer for me. I don't think Eze is quite as good of an option just because in a few weeks, the fixtures start to turn for the worse. But definitely shorter term, 2 returns since coming back from injury, on pens, 90 minutes, good fixtures. Eze could be a really, really decent shout. And of course, he plays Luton away in Game Week 13. So just to round up those first two, because they were the two big ones we were waiting for updates on. Bowen, I think I would keep just because we don't know if he's going to be fit for 13 and he's a good long-term option. I think Mitoma has to be a sell now that he's been ruled out for Game Week 13 and Brighton is struggling anyway. And the top 3 replacements, if you're looking to take out either of those, would be Mbeumo, Palmer or Eze. So I did have to cover this because at the moment Erling Haaland is flagged in FPL. A few people worried about him, and Pep did speak about Haaland in the press conference. I just want to preface this by saying I think Haaland's absolutely fine. I don't even think there is an injury, and I think this is all mind games. But I will just present the information that I've got here, which is Erling Haaland trained with some niggles on Thursday, and Erling Haaland uploaded a picture onto his own personal Twitter of him training on Thursday. So we do know that he was in training on Thursday. And he said that hopefully he'll be a part of Man City's training session on Friday. And then he went on to say, we do have problems, as do many other clubs. We'll see in the training session tomorrow at 6 p.m. I will know for sure which players... we'll see tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'll know for sure which players I have available. So, of course, this is the early kickoff. And so if he is struggling in any regard, maybe he's not risk, but I don't think he's struggling. He's been in training. I think this is such a big game, and Haaland wants to play in these big games. I would be extremely shocked if he's not starting and available. So I would feel very comfortable giving Haaland the armband. Maybe it just makes you think a little bit about your vice. Because Haaland is one of those players. If he's fit, he plays, right? He starts. He's not gonna come off the bench. So maybe just think about your vice captain, just in case this is real. Maybe he does re-aggravate some kind of injury, and you need your vice captain. This is a week to maybe think about it in more detail if you are going to give him the armband. And just to say, I don't think he's the best captain this week. Not just because I don't own him, just because I don't think it's a great fixture. Although it is at home, and Liverpool aren't perfect defensively. I just think there are better fixtures to target. But if you were going to give him the armband, this wouldn't put me off. This wouldn't change my mind around giving him that. So I wouldn't stress. The final thing to note, as I said, this is the early kickoff. So Liverpool, Man City at 12:30 on Saturday. There is a very, very good chance that we get early team news around Haaland and maybe some of the other players such as Darwin, Alvarez. Maybe if you want any information around like Gomez and Tsimikas, we should get some decent early team news. So if you are available before the deadline, tune into my deadline stream. I'll be giving you all of the latest updates we get. If I get any team news myself, I will, of course, share that with you. So for now, I think Haaland's fine, but we should get a definitive update tomorrow before the deadline. So very briefly, some updates around Spurs. We, of course, know that Romero is suspended. Van de Ven is injured. So they're already missing both of their centre-backs. Good news for Spurs, and if you own him as well, Destiny Udogie is fine and available to start despite pulling out of international duty. So he's been in training. If you watched the press conference as well, the way that Postecoglou delivered the information looked like basically Udogie will start. So I can't obviously confirm that, but looks like he's fine, looks like he's available. He's been in training. So if you've got Udogie and you want to start him, absolutely go for it. I mean, I think Villa will score, but he may be one of your better options. I wouldn't be going out and buying him just because of the issues that Spurs have. But if you have him and you're struggling with your defence, I don't think he's a priority transfer out at the moment. Unfortunately, the issues for Spurs do continue. So Sarr will be assessed over the next couple of days after returning from international break with an issue. So this is a big blow for them. The main reason for that is Bissouma is also suspended for 13. So I mean, if Spurs are genuinely without Sarr, Basuma, Van de Ven, and Romero, that's like that box, the spine of their team, and it will make them very weak defensively, even more so than they already might have been. And maybe then that does genuinely, and we'll discuss this again at the end, make Watkins a serious captaincy shout if they're missing the whole kind of centre of their team. Of course, there'll be players instead in there, and they do have some decent deputies, but this would make me worry slightly from a Spurs defensive perspective. So we'll have to wait and see there. Sarr could, of course, be available, but Basuma definitely won't be. The only thing that this does affect is I think it will make Spurs go even more attacking because they can't sit back and defend. Not that they do this anyway under Postecoglou, but if they're missing their two main defensive midfielders, they're missing both of their centre-backs, they're probably going to have to play the likes of Bentancur and maybe Lo Celso. They're going to probably go with a very attacking lineup, and maybe that genuinely will benefit Watkins and Son. It kind of plays into this idea that we think it will be a 4, 5, 6 goal kind of game between Spurs and Villa. And this just makes me think that's even more the case. So this makes me want to captain the likes of Watkins and Son, maybe even more so than I was already considering. That's a lot of hypothesizing. Of course, if Sarr is available, maybe they can play Højbjerg in defensive midfield alongside Sarr and play Lo Celso as the 10. All of a sudden, it doesn't look like a particularly weak midfield, but this certainly does make him a bit weaker, and especially even if it's only Basuma out, we know how good Basuma has been for them this season. So I'll leave it there. No real major issues on top of what we already knew. Udogie being back is good. Sarr potentially being out could be an issue. I still think Son and Watkins in their own rights could be decent captaincy shouts. I mean, it is almost getting to the point now where we don't even need to go through Newcastle injury updates because Eddie Howe is surpassing Arteta as being as vague as possible. And to some extent, I think every week lying, genuinely. It's gone from like concealing the truth to is he just lying to us every week? Because some of the information we get is just completely useless. But I'll very, very briefly run through it. You can see Craig Hope here, great to follow for Newcastle news. He sort of summarises it very briefly. Eddie Howe says that Fabian Schär and Almiron are fine. So if you own Fabian Schär, again, with a lot of defensive issues for some of our teams this week, that's obviously a boost if you own him. So no issue with Fabian Schär. Isak, I don't want to give too much away. So a lot of people ask me that either own him or are looking to buy him. Is Isak an option? For me, no. Based on this, based on Eddie Howe's track record, Isak could be out for 6 months or completely fit and available. This doesn't tell us anything. So I think if you own him, maybe you can keep him and start him because I think if he is available to play, it looks like Wilson is out. So I think Isak should be starting, but they could still start Gordon as the number 9. So for me, this makes Isak an avoid. But if you own him, maybe I wouldn't sell him. Botman, I said on Twitter today, it's getting kind of comical now with Botman. Every week it's like, oh, he could be available or he could be out for the rest of his life. Like, it's so extreme both ways. We just have no idea what's going on with Botman. But the latest update is hoping not too long and that he rejoins the group pretty quickly, but there's a chance that may not happen. So absolutely no information on Botman. If you have Lascelles, I do think that's looking good. Looks like you've probably got the sales for at least a few more weeks, but I'll give you a better update at some point if we get it. And then Longstaff, still check-in. Wilson's still unclear. So I'm going to leave it there for Newcastle because we're getting absolutely no updates. But I think if you do own Lascelles and Livramento, looks fairly good. I mean, Burn looks like he'll be out well into 2024. At the moment, there's no sign of Botman returning in the immediate future. So Lascelles looks pretty good. Just a note, Kieran Trippier obviously returned from England duty a little bit early, but he has been in training all week. So Kieran Trippier is not an issue. Not that he's flagged or anything, but a few people were worried around whether he would be available. He has been training all week and he will be available for the Chelsea game. So I think that's it with the Newcastle stuff. Unfortunately, no definitive updates. And it looks like, along with Arteta, we probably can't rely on Howe for any good updates in the press conferences. So just to finish off the press conference section of this video, we've got some other key updates. Then I'll move on to some of your questions, mainly around defenders and captaincy, which there are quite a few questions around. Firstly, Manchester United, Onana and Shaw are available, which is a massive boost for Manchester United in what I think will be a very difficult game against Everton. At the moment, it is looking more likely that Shaw will be played at centre-back. I personally don't like that. I think from a Manchester United perspective, we need a left-back that is overlapping Rashford so that he can cut inside. We know how well Rashford plays when he's with Shaw versus when Shaw doesn't feature. So I think it needs to be Shaw or Reguilon at left-back. But at the moment, it looks more likely that Shaw will feature at centre-back. Maybe in the future, Shaw becomes an option. But for now, with the fixtures, with the other issues that Manchester United have, I don't think that he's a player that I'd be looking to bring in. Højlund looks like he'll be a doubt, but there is a chance that he plays. So it looks pretty 50-50 at the moment, and he'll be assessed ahead of the weekend. And then Johnny Evans is out, which looks very, very good for Maguire again. I would predict that it probably will be Maguire and Shaw at right centre-back and left centre-back. Could potentially be Shaw at left-back with someone else at centre-back. But for the time being, not looking great with Manchester United. If Haaland is available and Shaw is available, that does give them a bit of a boost, though. For Arsenal, we did get a bit of an update from Arteta, which is better than usual. Jesus and Ødegaard are going to be available. Jesus, it looked very positive, absolutely fine. Obviously, played 90 minutes for Brazil, so I don't think he'll start, is my prediction in Game Week 13. I think it'll probably be a front three of Martinelli, Trossard, and Saka, with Jesus coming off the bench. But with Jesus now being back and looking good and looking fit, I do think that will benefit the Arsenal attack and probably benefit Martinelli and Saka. So if you own either of those, I would give them another week or two, just in case, obviously, Jesus returning is a big boost. And he does start, and they start to look a lot better again. On Ben White, sounds like he'll be training on Friday, and he'll be assessed then. So there is a chance that Ben White features. But again, maybe not a player that they want to risk given how important he is to their team. And they could quite conceivably play someone like a Tomiyasu instead. So maybe that's good news for Gabriel if White doesn't feature, because it's one more space in the defence and Tomiyasu will switch out to the other side. But we'll have to wait and see on that. If you do own White, maybe you keep him because it doesn't look like he's out long term, but he might not feature in Game Week 13. On Chelsea, there are a couple of updates. Colwill is now fit, ain't available. We're going to discuss Colwill in the next section, because at his price, with the fixtures coming up post-game, it's sort of 14-15, I do really, really like the idea of bringing him in. I think he'll be a very reliable option over the busy Christmas period. Nkunku is still not quite ready. So before the international break, we had this update that Nkunku really wanted to be fit and available, and he told Pochettino that he will be fit for the Newcastle game. He's not fit for the Newcastle game. He's still continuing his rehabilitation phase of his program, but it looks a lot better than it had previously. So my prediction is probably in the next 3 to 4 game weeks, we'll get Nkunku back. And at that point, that will be when Chelsea go into their really nice run of fixtures. And we'll have a few different options, the likes of Sterling, Palmer, and Nkunku. I still feel like Palmer will be the one based on price, penalties, and also underlying data. But it may be that at some point, especially if he does take penalties back, Nkunku could start to enter our thinking. And then finally, around Aston Villa, I'm actually recording this like directly after the Aston Villa press conference. I haven't yet seen any quotes around Matty Cash, but we do have an inside source in the FPL community for Aston Villa, and he said Matty Cash has been in training all week. And on top of that, we have seen pictures now emerging of Matty Cash in training. So whilst we haven't got a quote, or I haven't at the time we're recording this, from Emery, I'd be very, 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 very surprised if Matty Cash doesn't start, because it looks like he's been in training all week. So in this section, we're going to look at the best cheap defenders under 5 million. And the reason for that, lots of people still looking to remove Cash due to the fixtures that are coming up, and maybe some slight doubts around his availability for Game Week 13. Or maybe you're still holding on to the likes of Botman or Burn, or you just want to sort out some of the worst fixtures in your defence too. So lots of people looking at defensive transfers, and especially those cheaper ones. I should note, if you have more than 5 million, there are 3 players that I really like, obviously outside of the likes of Trippier and Trent, who are very, very expensive. One of those is actually Virgil van Dijk. I think he's back to his best this season, looking pretty good for bonus points, and he's always a threat from corners too. And I actually like the fixtures coming up for Liverpool. So if you've got around 6 mil for Van Dijk, I don't mind him. But the 2 probably slightly better options, especially taking into account price, is Saliba, who is probably the best defensive pick at the moment, with the fixtures coming up, with how nailed he is, with how good the Arsenal defence are, and not a terrible fixture this week. Obviously, Saliba is a fantastic pick, but he is 5.4 million. And then the player that is probably looking like the most likely defensive move for me this week, which is Reece James. Now, definitely not for the faint-hearted, right? He is just as likely to pick up a 1-pointer and get injured or get a red card or score an own goal than he is to get a haul. But he has that explosive ability that not many defenders have outside of the likes of Trent and Trippier. Obviously at a very cheap price. Chelsea have been extremely impressive defensively this season, and the fixtures coming up are so good. And he does look fitter than he has returning from injury than on previous occasions. I'm not saying that he will stay fit, because I don't know that, but it looks like he's having his minutes managed slightly more. Looks like he is being a little bit more conservative with his movements, and he just looks very positive. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't get re-injured, but for me, I'm looking at high upside picks. It's the way that I like to play FPL. It's the reason that I love owning players like Darwin Nunez, where other people don't. Reece James is very much a me pick. So for me, I like him, but the safer option for only 0.1 more is definitely Saliba. It doesn't help that I am 0.1 short of Saliba. So I can do Cash to James for free. I can't do that with Saliba. So at the moment, I'm looking at James. But let's say you want to make a downgrade, or let's say you only have sort of up to 5 mil. I do still think that I would put Gahey and Mitchell at the top. Palace's fixtures are starting to run out, but if you are looking for a defender that in any given week you don't mind starting and you think they could get you a clean sheet, Palace are good for clean sheets. And it's not just in the easy games. They can keep clean sheet against tough opposition too. So I like the next few for Palace. After that, the fixtures definitely turn. But assuming that they are one of 4 defenders you own, and they're not someone you have to start every week, I still think Palace are pretty good. And they do rotate nicely with some of the other defenders that we own. So a little bit shorter term, I like Palace, but if you are looking for someone to own and start every week for the next 10 to 15, maybe you would start to think about swerving Palace defenders now because their better fixtures are starting to run out. I've still got Gabriel in second. I feel like his chance of rotation is being overplayed slightly. I still think he is more likely to be rotated than the likes of Saliba, but that doesn't mean that he's going to miss every game. I still feel like he's first choice, and I still feel like he'll start at least 8, probably 9 of the next 10. So I like Gabriel if you can suck up the one benching you get. And to be honest, I know he came on a couple of times earlier in the season, but that was all sort of very game state dependent. I don't think he'll come off the bench very often in cameo. So as long as you do have someone off the bench, I don't think it's the end of the world if he misses the odd fixture. So I do really like Gabriel still for under 5 mil. I think Colwill would be third for me. Looks like he's available now for Gameweek 13. Not the best fixture in 13, but from 16 onwards, you are going to want a Chelsea defender, and Colwill is the cheapest that you can get, and probably the best as well, in terms of nailed for minutes, decent for bonus points, doesn't carry much attacking threat, but he feels almost like a cheap Saliba, playing in a slightly weaker defence, with slightly less goal threat, but very, very nailed on. And still someone that is likely to get you clean sheets over this period, especially when you look at the fixtures for Chelsea. So I love Colwill as an option. Someone that I am considering this week if I don't want to take the risk with Reece James. And maybe I'll double up with Reece James and Colwill from sort of game week 16 onwards, maybe alongside someone like a Palmer. I've then got Castagna and Aït-Nouri as 2 cheaper options. I think I prefer Aït-Nouri to Castagna. The reason that he is below is I was looking into Aït-Nouri because he was actually an option for me this week to bring in. He's on 4 yellow cards, and that does worry me slightly because, yes, he could end up getting suspended in a game where you don't want to play him anyway, which would be the ideal situation, right? Gets a bit of a rest, gets suspended in the week that he's on your bench anyway, and then you've got him back. But Game week 18 is fast approaching, and if we're not going to free hit, we need all of our players to be available. It could be your luck that he gets suspended in game week 17 for game week 18, and I just think you need to bring in players that you know you will have available for game week 18. And also, his fixture in that week is against Chelsea. So I like Aït-Nouri. He's very, very attacking. Wolves have looked very good defensively. They're second for expected goals conceded over the last 6. So Wolves are looking good. Aït-Nouri's looking good. The 4 yellow cards puts me off slightly, but maybe you just take a risk anyway. Fulham haven't been as bad defensively as I thought this season. We know Castagna carries some attacking threat, and they have a much better fixture in game week 18. So maybe Castagna the slightly safer pick, although with Tete back, they could still play Tete right back and Robinson left back. So I guess they both carry their issues and they both carry their risk. Castagna, a slight rotation risk. Aït-Nouri, maybe the risk of getting his 5th yellow card. But I still feel like they both offer pretty good value. I've still got Lascelles and Livramento in here, but again, we don't know if Livramento is 100% nailed, and we don't know how long until Botman's back. And the fixtures aren't perfect over the next 3 or 4, but taking into account all of that, they are still starting defenders for Newcastle, and we know how strong Newcastle are defensively. So I still don't mind Lascelles and Livramento. And then in 7th, I've chucked Pinnock in there. Yes, he blanks in 18, but if you are planning to free hit in 18, Pinnock could be a really nice shout because they've got great fixtures from game week 14 onwards and a likely double in game week 20, and he carries some attacking threat. So I've put him in there as like a 7th option. If you are free hitting, I'll be very, very tempted, but I know a lot of people maybe haven't decided that yet, and it does kind of force you to free hit in 18, even if you maybe decide that you don't want to. So that's sort of what I would be doing there. Depends sort of how short-term, how long-term, which weeks you need these defenders, but those are some of the key ones that I would consider. If you can stretch to Saliba, he's probably the best defender to own in the game at the moment. So finally, for captaincy, I've got no idea, in all honesty. This is such a difficult week because the best options have the most difficult fixtures, and the worst options, i.e. the players that you wouldn't really normally trust for the captaincy, have the slightly better fixtures. It is unfortunate that Bowen is a doubt for game week 13 because he was going to be my captain for game week 13 just because he's so good away from home and his data's been very strong this season. And you know he plays 90 minutes when he's available, that everything looked perfect on paper for a differential captain on Bowen. Now I don't trust it. Even if we get news that he's definitely starting, how many minutes is he going to get? Is there a chance of him re-aggravating that injury and coming off early? So it's too much of a doubt for me. Obviously, every week, the 2 main captaincy shouts are Haaland and Salah. they are playing together, against each other in the early kickoff. I still feel like there'll be goals in that game, though. Now, if I had to predict it, I'd say something like 3-2 to Man City. So if I think Liverpool are going to score 2 and City are going to score 3, are Haaland and Salah going to get returns? Almost definitely, to be honest. So I have absolutely no issue with Haaland or Salah captaincy. I think Haaland is a better captain than Salah this week, purely because it's at home. I think as FPL options at the moment, they're very, very similar. Very similar output. The data's slightly in favour of Haaland, but we know that they're both always going to be on the pitch. We know they're both on penalties, and they will get chances in every game. In fact, last season, Salah scored in both the home and away fixture against Manchester City. We've got an attacking return in both games. So I have no issue with either of these. If you want to back the early kickoff and you want to back there to be goals, I have no issue going for either. I would probably just about lean Haaland. I think after that, you've got 3 sort of leading options for me at the moment, which is Son, Eze, and Watkins. I would be avoiding Eze because it's Luton away. And actually, Luton have been pretty impressive defensively and going forward this season at home for them. So if it was Luton at home for Eze, I'd feel a little bit more confident. And so for me, I wouldn't be going there. But I do still feel like he's a great option to at least own for Game Week 13. I think in a similar way to how I said with Man City and Liverpool, if I were to predict the Villa-Spurs game, I would say like 3-3. Something like that. I think there'll be tons of goals in this game, as I spoke about earlier in the video, just due to the fact that Villa haven't been great defensively away from home. Both teams play a high line, and also Spurs are missing quite a few players that are key to sort of the spine of their team. So I think, again, in a similar way to how I said with Salah and Haaland, I think Son and Watkins will both return. So my prediction, honestly, is that all 5 of the players on your screen will probably return. And the 4 on the right, I think all could return 2+ times. It's just about trying to predict who you think is more likely to return 2 or more times. Because if they're all likely to get 1, you're trying to look for that player that will get multiple returns. So the reason that I'm currently myself leaning towards Heung-min Son is he's just involved in such a high percentage of the big chances that Spurs get. And that also goes for all 4 of these players here. But I think Son in particular, even with Maddison and Richarlison out, if Spurs get big chances, which when teams have played against Villa, especially when they've played at home, they have, it's got to be Son that gets the big chances. And in comparison to all of these other players, Son is the player I trust most when he gets a big chance to finish it. And so I love him for that option. And it just feels like it feels like a very Heung-min Son fixture. We know previously, did he get 21 points? Not last season, the season before that, against Aston Villa. So Heung-min Son has that in his locker to get that huge haul against Aston Villa. It's a fixture that suits him. And I've just got a bit of a feeling that he could be a decent captaincy shout. The other reason that I would maybe back Salah, Haaland, and Son ahead of Watkins is those 3 are all on penalties, whereas Watkins isn't. And we've seen with both Haaland and Salah in recent weeks, and also Eze, but Haaland and Salah in particular, they keep getting these like 16 pointers, right? Haaland and Salah have both in like the last 3 or 4 weeks, both got 15 and 16 pointers. In all of those weeks, they're getting a penalty as well. And that isn't me saying that Haaland and Salah are bad outside the penalties, but when you're looking for that big score from your captain, almost always when a captain gets a monster haul, sort of 15+ points, there's usually a penalty chucked in there as well. Because to try and get 3+ returns from open play is very difficult. So I will always, if possible, try to captain the penalty taker. And obviously Salah, Haaland, and Son, and also Eze, of course, are on penalties, whereas Watkins isn't. So if I were to rank the captaincy options at the moment, just in my personal opinion, it's probably Son, Haaland, Salah, Watkins, Eze. There are other options, obviously, that I haven't mentioned, the likes of Saka, but I don't like him away from home. You could take a risk on Bowen. You could captain any number of other players. You might want to go for a Bruno Fernandes if you're feeling really risky. But for me, it's these 5. That's the order that I would rank them in. I'd love to know down below in the comments who you captaining for Game Week 13. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 13 deadline decisions video, rounding up all of the press conference updates, the key injury news as well, and answering some of your key questions too. If you did enjoy today's video and you got some use from it, please do smash that like button. Let's aim for 2,000 likes, and make sure to subscribe as well. We are on the road to 110,000 subscribers. Until next time, which will be the deadline stream tomorrow. Don't miss it. Early Man City news, early Liverpool news. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.